Hello everybody and welcome back to Rokai's Raid Guides. Real quick before we jump into the video, I wanted to make everybody aware of a new perk we have available for YouTube members and Twitch subscribers of any level, where we have dedicated help channels inside of Discord to help you clear bosses more effectively, get personalized feedback, and custom tips more in depth than what the guides can offer. If that's interesting to you, check out the link in the description below for more info, and until then, let's jump into the next guide. Megaera, the multi-headed Hydra snake boss thing. This fight is a blast, and it is a healer's dream. There is tons and tons of constant healing to do during these rampages, and from everything else we've seen so far in Throne of Thunder, this is a pretty significant jump up in difficulty. It requires a ton of healing throughput, and if you're looking at this in week 1, I would say add this to the list of, hey, let's skip it and come back when we have more gear. And with that little disclaimer out of the way, let's jump into raid comp. For this fight, I would say for the very foreseeable future, this is absolutely a required 3-heal fight. Tons and tons of throughput is needed, and then you're also going to want to 2-tank this, and unlike some of the other fights, you can do any mixture of DPS. Cleave isn't necessary here. It's primarily going to be single target besides a few different adds that spawn, but for the most part, any DPS will work. Just make sure you have 3 healers, 2 tanks. Similar to some other council-style fights, each of these heads, the red, purple, green, and blue heads, all have their own unique mechanics, plus a couple of mechanics that exist throughout the entire fight. So let's jump into the first one and the most difficult portion of the encounter by far, which is Rampage. Rampage is triggered each time one of Megaera's heads is killed and lasts for 20 seconds. 2 important things to know here. First is that since it lasts for so long, you need 2 raid cooldowns staggered for each Rampage. So you want 1 raid cooldown for the first half and a second raid cooldown for the second half. Beyond that, the damage of Rampage is pretty high. By default, it's 87,000 damage per second to everybody in the raid, and that damage is also increased for each Rampage after the first. With Rampage being the most dangerous part of the fight, I wanted to give some extra context. We were seeing Rampage happen about every minute or so, but since it is triggered off of the death of one of Megaera's heads, this could vary from group to group, depending on how much damage you have. Could be closer together or could be further apart. So just for rough context, with us being in full BIS gear prior to Throne of Thunder, so Heart of Fear and Terrace full BIS, we were seeing them about every minute, give or take a little bit. So when you go to play in your cooldowns, and I highly recommend using a tool like Foji assignments or method raid tools to pre-plan your cooldowns, I would gauge it off of about a minute between rampages when you're laying out those cooldowns. Part 2 of that is that Rampage 4, 5, and 6 are infinitely more dangerous than 1, 2, and 3. So if you have the ability to do so, layer either more cooldowns into those later rampages or just put your strongest ones there as well. On top of Rampage, there are 2 other effects Megaera gains after a head dies. The first is called Hydra Frenzy, and the second is called Elemental Blood of Megaera. For Hydra Frenzy, each time a head is killed, the heads remaining outside of the Concealing Fog are healed to full and, importantly, attack 20% faster, and this stacks. So each time one is killed, it'll be 20% faster. So after you've killed 5 heads, the heads are all attacking 100% faster. For Elemental Blood of Megaera, whenever you kill a head, a new one will regenerate in its place of a different type. And then any time one of those heads is regenerated, all heads of the same type deals another 20% increased damage per head of that type. So this one is type specific. So for example, let's say 6 green heads are killed, which would never happen. That one would be increased by 120%, all damage from the green head. The final kind of passive mechanic that always exists is called Concealing Fog. So at any given time, only 2 heads are considered active. The other 2 are inactive or inside of Concealing Fog. So if you look right before we pull the boss here, you can see the blue and green head. Those are front and center. Those are the active heads, and those will be targetable. And then you can see the red and purple head are actually in Concealing Fog, or they're further back kind of into the water there. Those are untargetable or inactive at any given time. So you can only attack the active heads. Knowing which heads are active or inactive will be important later for each individual mechanic of the different colored heads because they have different effects based on whether or not they are active or inactive at the given time. With all the general mechanics out of the way, we'll go into each individual head. For starters, every head follows the same type of rules, which is if it is active, it only does a frontal that the tank has to deal with, and we'll cover that in more detail in a tank section. And if it is inactive, it has a unique ability. But no matter what, active equals only does a frontal, inactive or in Concealing Fog does its special ability. So no matter what, if it's active, always frontal. If it's inactive, special ability is unlocked. It can never be both. So starting off with the blue or frozen head, when inactive, the special ability it gains is called Torrent of Ice. This fixates on a random player and is a laser beam of ice that follows them around the room. If you were hit by the impact zone of that beam, it does 175,000 damage every second that you remain hit by it. And then after you have kited it around a room, it leaves behind a trail. And that icy ground that it leaves behind deals 88,000 damage every second that somebody stays inside of it, and also reduces their movement speed by 5%. That 5% slow effect also does stack, so the longer you're in the ice, the more it slows you up to 20 times, so eventually it can root you in place. And then the second part of it, on heroic only, that ice path doubles in size over the course of 2 minutes, so you have to get it as far away from your stack points as possible because it will slowly grow throughout the course of the fight. Okay, moving on to the purple or arcane head. When inactive, it gains an ability called Nether Tear. Nether Tear spawns a total of 3 adds out of it over the course of 6 seconds. So 1 add every 2 seconds. These are the little nether worms you see here. And then each of those worms have 2 abilities. Nether Spike, and then the second ability is Suppression. Nether Spike is just a cast on a random player that deals 140k damage if the cast goes off. And then Suppression is a channeled effect that will completely stun and immobilize a player for 15 seconds or the entire duration of that cast. So that needs to be interrupted. Typically in 25-man, you would use a tank to hold aggro on these and make it easier. In 10-man, truthfully, you just don't have that flexibility because both of your tanks are dealing with active heads. So your best option here is when they spawn, get quick CCs and interrupts on them and kill them as quickly as possible. We found Binding Trap and Ice Trap and then Mass Roots as the best options to do so. But things like Leg Sweep can also work. Basically, instantly switch to them the second they spawn, CC them, and kill them quickly because you just don't have an option to tank them. Okay, next up is the Flaming or Red Head, which has one ability called Cinders. Now, Cinders is a debuff that can go on any player in the raid except for the tanks, and it has a handful of different effects. The first is whichever player it targets, it is a damage over time ability that will last until dispelled. So when you have Cinders on you, you take 97,000 damage every second that you have the debuff. So it ticks pretty hard, and because of how hard these rampages hit in between killing heads, you can't really use a personal, so you have to dispel them pretty quickly. Part 2 of this is every 3 seconds while you have Cinders on you, you leave behind one of these fire puddles that you can see around the room right now. These also deal damage when standing inside the puddle, but also can remove the icy torrent fields on the ground. So the way you want to use Cinders is, if you can, run through the ice on the ground, drop a couple of fire pools on top of the ice, and then get dispelled. This will help give you more space throughout the fight, and we'll talk about that more in the strategy section, but just as a general pointer. Melee, you guys can also get Cinders like I mentioned, but you have to deal with it a little bit different. You won't have time to get out to where those ice fields are, so you have 2 options. Either get dispelled where you are, right in place, and then just have the melee stack move, or in a perfect world, you can actually jump into the water, get dispelled, and then hop back on. That way melee doesn't lose any room near the head. So just as a tip for how you guys should handle it, either move away, get dispelled, or if you can, jump into the water and get dispelled. Finally is the green or venom head, which is by far the most dangerous. You'll actually see we only kill this head 1 time throughout the entire fight, so that we typically don't have to deal with this mechanic. But it's these giant green swirlies you see here on the ground. This is called Acid Rain. It targets 3 random players. It deals 500k damage to anybody standing inside that green swirly, but still does damage even if you're outside of it. It's just reduced, so it's a pretty huge raid hit, which is why it's really important to only deal with that mechanic once and only kill that green head one singular time. That wraps up all of these special abilities that the heads do when they are in Concealing Fog or when they're inactive. So now we'll go over each individual breath, which is 99% of what the tanks are going to be dealing with, and these things hurt. Now, as a general rule of thumb, all of the breaths have a very similar pattern, which is each breath after the first leaves some type of debuff and is going to deal more damage than the last breath that you took. So, really quick note for our DPS players, a really big portion of this fight is making sure your tanks stay alive by killing these heads fast enough. The more breaths that your tanks take, the more likely they are to die. So you're kind of on a timer for each one of these heads to try and get their debuffs to reset during the rampage. Tanks, this may go without saying, but you're going to need a large cooldown for every single breath. So whether that's one of your own cooldowns or an external, you need to plan for having a cooldown for every single breath. This is also what makes it really scary, is in 10-man, you have a very low amount of externals, if any, in your raid comp, and you obviously as a tank only have so many personal cooldowns to use. What you need to plan for is having to take 3 breaths. Now, in a perfect world, you only get 2 if you have enough damage in your raid, but just mentally plan on having to take 3 breaths and know what cooldown you're going to use for each 3 breaths on each head. So let's start with the frozen head or the blue head. This breath is called Arctic Freeze. It does 165,000 damage every second for 3 seconds. And if you take 4 stacks of Arctic Freeze, you will be stunned for 20 seconds. So long story short there, if you take 4 stacks, it's an instant wipe, right? You have to kill the head before you get 4 breaths cast on you. Next up is the Venomous Head, which in my opinion as a non-tank player was the most dangerous one. This took the most amount of time to figure out how to handle and use cooldowns around, but it's called Rot Armor. So the Venomous Head will do corrosive gas on anybody hit by that frontal or the tank breath. It also deals the same amount of damage, 165,000 nature damage every second for 3 seconds. And then the debuff it leaves behind is that you take 10% increased damage from all sources for 45 seconds afterwards, and that stacks. Tanks, since we leave the Venomous Head up for 90% of this fight, what you will do to handle this is one tank will take 3 breaths, 2 to 3 breaths from the Venomous Head. Then after you kill one of the other heads and a rampage happens, you guys will do a tank swap after each rampage to be able to reset these stacks. Next up is the Arcane or Purple Head. The frontal does the same amount of damage as the others, 165,000 per second for 3 seconds. And then the debuff that it leaves behind. The debuff it leaves behind is 10% of all healing received is redirected to anybody within 8 yards of you that was not hit by the breath. And that also stacks. So in a way, it's like a pseudo healing reduction to the tank. But the people around the tank will get a little bit of extra healing. But the important part is that that tank will take a little bit less direct healing. Just like all the other effects, by the way, this one stacks as well. So it'll be 10%, then 20%, then 30%, and so on for each breath you take. Last up is the Flaming or Red Head, and this frontal is called Ignite Flesh. As always, 165,000 damage per second for 3 seconds is the just raw damage of the frontal, and then the debuff it leaves behind is the painful part. So for 45 seconds after being hit by the frontal, you will take a ticking ignite damage from it for 39,000 additional fire damage every single second for 45 seconds, and just like everything else, this effect stacks. This one hurts really, really, really bad and will require a lot of direct healing and then a rotation of cooldowns to survive it, because after 2 or 3 breaths, this thing is going to be chunking your tank like crazy. Okay, so that covers all of the mechanics. Just a quick recap. When active, every single head has a unique breath that a tank has to deal with, and you'll want to point away from the raid. When inactive, every single head has its own special ability that it will use, and you'll plan raid CDs for every single rampage, which occurs after a head dies. So with the mechanics out of the way, let's jump into how to actually handle this fight. The strategy itself is relatively easy. It's more the execution that becomes difficult. The layer of difficulty for 10-man is that you don't have nearly enough cooldowns for the rampages, so you have to be really diligent in planning those. And B, you can't as easily paint the room with like that bad trail of frost as you can on 25 man, where you can really abuse warlock gates. So you have to have really good tank positioning for frontals and even better kiting ability by your range players, leaving that trail of frost in a way that doesn't really affect your playable room when you have to stack for rampages. So I'm going to use a lot of different raid plans here to try and paint a picture of how you should position. But the general premise is face the tank frontal away from the raid to give the middle of the room the most playable space where they don't have to worry about it. Take the ice torrent and the trail of frost that follows and paint that along the back of the room to give as much space near the front. Range players should try to play at max range pretty much at all times so that you can more quickly and easily get to the back of the room, and then leave the centermost part of the room closer to melee for your two healers because you want them to be in range of both tanks at all times. For the rampages, you're always going to want to stack together, including both tanks. Since there's no active or inactive abilities happening from the heads, Rampage is the only mechanic that will occur when it's happening. And we use these raid markers. You can see this is where we stack based on what head we're killing next, right? So if fire is what we're killing next, then we all stack on red. If arcane is what we're killing next, then we'll stack on diamond for that rampage, and so on. So it's just all color coordinated, so we know exactly where we're headed to make the most use out of, you know, ground effect type heals and things like barrier and SLT, things like that. So the second part of the strategy is what order you're supposed to kill the heads in. Thankfully, this has kind of been solved for us, and there's just an order that's significantly easier than the rest. Because as a reminder, each time a head dies, one, it then becomes inactive in the back and you have to deal with its special ability. But two, that head now does increased damage each time that it respawns. So you intentionally kill in a specific order, one, to make the damage you take a little bit easier, and two, to reduce the number of annoying mechanics you have to deal with. So the kill order will always be this: blue, red, purple, blue, red, green, blue. The biggest reason that you see us kill green at number 6 is so that when we have Bloodlust active, we only have to deal with the mechanic that it does one single time and never again. That's that giant swirly that can one-shot you basically. And then the rest of it is a lot of it making positioning really, really easy and reducing the amount of scary mechanics that can happen. Okay, so catching back up to the video, we have now killed the blue head and the red head, and now Arcane, the purple one, is now active. You can see positioning wise, we're on the far left side of the room and I'm kiting an ice torrent straight back. The reason for this is that when the arcane head is active, we tank it in a way that the breath happens towards the water instead of the rest of the room, and we could kite ice back to the side that we'll never use that part of the room ever again. And I'll show it in a raid plan really quick as well. So the tank that's actively tanking Arcane stands against like that rock pillar and is going to be facing the breath away. Put all your range and melee on the far left. That way you can kite ice there and not even have to worry about removing it with that cinders debuff or those little puddles of fire. You can just ignore that ice forever because of the way we're killing these heads. The raid will never be positioned over on that side of the room ever again. So you just don't have to think about the ice, kite it straight back and then move on. Okay, with the arcane head dead, we're never going to use that diamond side of the room ever again. The only 3 heads remaining that will spawn are either going to be red, blue, or green. So that left space there is basically completely ignored, and you're just going to be cleaving ads. Anytime they spawn, they're your number 1 priority since we don't have a tank to pick them up. Reminder, they can be CC'd. Hunter, Binding Shot, and Trap is really, really good for this, and then using any kind of AoE like leg sweep, things like that are really, really good. And then stacking on the next marker when Rampage occurs, and then just blasting as much damage. After each Rampage ends, as a reminder, that's when the mechanics start back up again. So while Rampage happens, none of those behind the scenes mechanic like Ice Torrent or Cinders can occur, but as soon as Rampage is over, those mechanics exist again. So you stack for Rampage and then immediately need to spread again for Ice Torrent and for Cinders. Thankfully, the flow of the fight is relatively easy. To be honest, in 10-man, the scary part is really just the rampages and then properly kiting the ice torrent. The movement side is not too bad. Killing the ads quickly is totally fine, and making sure you get quick dispels on cinders. So it's just rinse and repeat. Ellie Shaman and any other high AoE class kind of trivializes the ad portion of it. I would say outside of just the rampages, making sure you kill the nether worms fast and get interrupts on them or any other form of CC is the second most important thing that you could do. Now that we've killed 5 of the 7 heads needed to kill the boss, 2 really important things to note. The first is that we'll never use the X and diamond side of the room, the red and purple side. No heads are ever going to spawn there, so you can kite cinders and ice traps back there, and it'll actually adjust how you position. I'll show a raid plan for that in just a second. And then the other part of it is that, as a reminder, each rampage increases in damage. So Rampage 5 that we just dealt with there is where you're going to want to have the most amount of raid CDs available, large personals. It's kind of an empty the bag moment where you need to use every single thing you can to live, because the next rampage you'll actually have bloodlust for. Okay, so here's a quick look at what positioning looks like outside of rampages for the remainder of the fight. So you'll never be killing X or Diamond ever again, so you can now use that space behind you for ice and fire. So you'll want to put the ranged players kind of hugging X and then kiting ice behind you near purple and dropping fire as well. And then you use your healers cheating a little bit more towards green, and then they can kite ice straight backwards if needed, since again, X and Diamond are never going to be used for the remainder of the fight. Okay, so you successfully made it through Rampage number 5, which is likely the scariest part of the entire fight. From that moment forward, head number 6 that you kill is the Venom head. As a reminder, once this one dies, the scariest individual mechanic of the fight will be triggered. So you'll have that massive Venom explosion that hits 3 random people. As soon as the Venom head dies, you are lusting, you're stacking up on blue, and you are killing the frozen head. Obviously, you need to AoE any ads that are left. Any single personal or raid cooldown that you happen to have available, send, and then you are just nuking the frozen head to the best of your ability. Now, you're going to see that Venom explosion for the first time. What's really important is just to get as far away from it as humanly possible. Once that rampage ends, you're going to see the Venom explosion be cast almost immediately afterwards. You can see we spread out here. The ice torrent goes on a Dwa. He just kites that like normal. And then here's the Venom explosion. Just get as far away from it as possible. Again, if any cooldown is up, use it. It did about half damage to the raid. And that is the end of the fight. Bloodlust really makes the end much, much simpler than the remainder of it. So kind of going back over the entire thing from start to finish in a more simplified format. Kite ice beams in areas that you're not going to be using. Use the cinders or that fire debuff to remove as much ice as possible, but more realistically, just dispel that quickly so you don't lose somebody. Kill the heads as fast as possible to prevent your tanks from taking too many applications of the breath. Stack on the raid markers you see here for each rampage. Use more and more cooldowns for each rampage after the first, because it continues to do more and more damage. The kill order is always going to be the exact same, which is blue, red, purple, blue, red, green, lust, and then kill the blue head to finish off. Lastly are these pesky little nether worms. They might seem insignificant, but in 10-man, since you don't have a tank to pick them up, you have to crowd control them, you have to interrupt their casts, and kill them so fast. If you let any of those casts go out, it could potentially one-shot somebody, and especially the suppress channel that they do can be beyond annoying. So prioritize those ads very heavily. I know I've said it a bunch of times throughout the guide, but I can't really stress enough that Rampage is genuinely the scariest and hardest part of the fight. It's going to be a true test on your healer's throughput ability, but even more so on 10-man, this is the first time that we really have to have absolutely perfect cooldown management in order to survive every single rampage as they increase in damage. So as my kind of little pro tip section for you all, I highly recommend using some type of tool to pre-plan your cooldowns, or you will not survive many of these rampages. So whether that's Foji assignments to plan cooldowns, MRT notes, and like some kind of K's trigger for automation there, or what I use myself, which is the Joardee and Saru raid assignment sheet, which has integration with the Foji raid assignments. I'll put a screenshot here for you guys to get an idea of what it looks like. If you want a really easy solution that will work right out of the box and have some cooldowns pre-mapped for you, I highly recommend this. But regardless of what resource you use, I am telling you, this fight is going to be infinitely easier if you take time before your raid and plan out every single cooldown throughout every single rampage, or it's going to be really, really, really hard to make it through these naturally. Again, I personally use Joardee's assignment sheet for this and map out all my cooldowns through there and then bring those into the Foji assignments. That is available in his Discord via a Patreon sub. I'll leave the link to both his Discord and his Patreon below. Definitely recommend using this. It requires the least amount of effort on your side of things, but some type of tool is a must-have for this encounter. And that wraps up everything for Megaera. It is extremely fun, but also extremely challenging. In my opinion, this is the first 10-man fight of the expansion that really requires everybody in the raid to play perfectly, has a numbers check for your healers and your DPS. Your tanks have to play perfect for each breath. It is a huge step up in difficulty, but extremely rewarding when you get it down. Best of luck to you guys. If you have questions, if you need extra help, don't forget to leave comments below or join the Discord where there's always 10-man conversations happening. And we will see you guys in the next one.